Welcome everyone, so excited you could join us. We're here on behalf of Amudim for the United Heal event. Tonight, for the next half an hour, we're going to discuss teenagers. We love our teenagers, of course when they're sleeping, but our greatest challenge. But perhaps Hashem gave us teenagers so we can work on ourselves and do the Ratzon Hashem in a different way. We can become better parents and grandparents. To my right are three amazing humans, mensches and rabbis. I'd just like to identify who they are before we take a deep dive right in now. Sitting to my right here is Rabbi Seth Grauer. He's in the trenches. He's the Rosh Yeshiva of not one but two high schools, one for boys, one for girls in Toronto, Opana and Ar Chaim. And he was really seeing day to day what's going on with our teenagers. In the middle here is Rabbi Korobkin. He's the Marad Asra of Canada's largest shul, the Bayit. A little plug for myself. My father-in-law was the architect for the Bayit. He's the past president of the RCA. And he comes from the perspective of speaking to parents who are dealing with teens, 13 to 19, 10 to 25, with all of their issues. And on the far right is Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tatz, really a generational outreach teacher. This book is, probably the most famous book for teenagers, The Thinking Jewish Teenager's Guide to Life. It's the book I give out, really before I even give out a chumash to kids for their bar and bar mitzvah. This is the book I give out. Rabbi Grauer is a great skier. Rabbi Korobkin teaches Mor Nevuchim online. And Rabbi Tatz just told me he has a black belt in judo. Now, one of those are lying, but that's totally irrelevant right now. Let's go in right now. So Rabbi Grauer will kick things off. Really, we can ask all three of you to answer this question. Things change so much. iPhones, the next model's coming out. I think we can clearly say there's a difference between the teenager 10 years ago till today. And what's your take on that?
Wow. Okay. Huge question to start. I'm sure that my distinguished colleagues will have what to add as well. I would say 2010 was the year that in many ways it was an incredible spike in anxiety, depression, feelings of inadequacy, self-harm among teenagers. And there is incredible correlation associated with the fact that that was the year in many ways that social media spiked in popularity, all sorts of new mechanisms that existed. The phones started exploding among our teenagers. And again, there is so much to say on this topic, but just to sort of start off with a small and short soundbite, one cannot look past the connectedness between the increase and rise in social media among our high school teenagers and rates of anxiety, depression, and just feelings and lack of self-esteem and self-concept and self-worth that exists. And I think that it took a long time in many ways for many within our community to realize and to recognize the impact that social media and just the ubiquitous use of internet started having on teens. I think now we know, and the question is what we're doing about it, how we are responding. But if I had to sort of pick one point to start us off and to get us going, that would be number one on my list.
Rabbi Korobkin?
I would only add to what Rabbi Grauer said, which is undoubtedly correct. I remember it distinctly because I came to Toronto to the Bayit almost exactly 11 years ago. And there was an article that had just come out in the Canadian Jewish News, Zichrono Livracha, that was talking about a new phenomenon that was manifesting itself in high school children called half Shabbos. Now, what was half Shabbos? It was children from Shomer Shabbos homes who were allegedly completely Shomer Shabbos, except for the fact that they carried their devices with them and would text on Shabbos. That was what they felt was an acceptable keeping of Shabbos, but they called it half Shabbos. And it was a new phenomenon. I can only say that if that's what was manifesting back then, in addition to what Rabbi Grauer is talking about is the psychological negative impact of social media, today the even greater ubiquity of these devices and the perceived necessity, and I say perceived because that's the way many of our children perceive them, has only made things go from half Shabbos to maybe For some children, it's even less than half Shabbos since then.
Yeah, I think that's all correct. I think the deeper question to ask is really whether the internet and social media are the cause, or maybe just one more symptom of something deeper. And no question, we see that young people now are, if you speak to people who work with the teens, they call it baggage. Baggage. The kids seem to have baggage they didn't seem to have just a few years ago. One young lady told me that when the Rabbi from the SEMS came to her city where she lives to interview girls for the seminary, she said, Rabbi, I think I need to be honest. I can't apply for the SEM without telling you that I'm on medication, for anxiety, and you probably won't take me. He said, young lady, if I didn't take girls who are on anti-anxiety medicine, I wouldn't have girls in my seminary. So there's no question. This is not only teens, by the way. We're seeing this across the board. Anxiety, depression, medications, I think it's a social phenomenon in general, but it seems to be hitting the teens particularly hard. Some say there's a general dumbing down as well, which it goes hand in hand with the social media. Again, how much of a cause and how much an effect is not clear. I think it's very clear that over the last few years, we've seen a precipitous decline in independent thinking and independent self-confidence, and these things seem to be manifested.
I'm a synagogue rabbi as well, outreach. My sense, though, is that some of the teens are taking this powerful tool and doing amazing things with it. I mean, I've never bought a stock when I was a teenager. I didn't know how to handle money. I had a Velcro wallet that I lost all the time. I get the sense that kids today, they're buying stocks. They know what they're doing. They're in control. And is there a positive at all twist with a percentage of them that are actually elevating their game because of so much technology? It's like Latov and Lara. Like, do we see that at all?
Look, I'll share a thought. Without a doubt, there's definitely, no one will disagree with the fact that there is incredible Tov that exists. Some of the websites are amazing. The amount of Torah that's consumed on the internet, kids who are able to put together Divrei Torah and prepare, they have lists of websites that they go to, and they're able to put together wonderful Divrei Torah. I think that I'm guilty to some extent in the sense that early on, years ago, 10 years ago, even earlier, I was a proponent, I was a believer of the internet is here to stay, social media is not going anywhere. We have to figure out how to integrate it within our lives. We have to figure out how to teach our children how to use it in moderation. We have to teach them how to be responsible. We have to do like we do with everything that exists in this world, where we take what's given to us and we teach our students, our Talmidim, our Talmidot, our children, how to act responsibly with it. And I think that in many ways we misunderstood, or at least I could speak for myself, just how challenging the pull is of what is a billion-dollar industry, of which you have huge numbers of really brilliant individuals who are curating content, building sites, whose sole purpose is it to bring our teenagers, our youngsters, and go beyond that into emerging adults, later adolescents, young adults, into the world. Think about it from the following perspective. Every product has a buyer, a seller, and the product, right? That's how business works. Everything has to be monetized in a very, very important way. And when it comes to social media, the buyer is actually the advertising agencies, the advertising content. The seller are the companies. The product is actually the people. The product are the students. The product are the teenagers. The product are adults of all ages. And the difference is, at what age are our kids old enough and responsible enough to be able to consume the material properly? In 1998, the United States government set the age of 13 as the age by which consent would not be needed to give out personal information. That hasn't been updated since then. And it's a crazy thing in many ways. So yes, there is incredible positive content, amazing opportunities that exist. The question is, to what extent are we making a mistake by giving it in an open environment without the proper controls and moderation that really is necessary? And I think that in many ways we are still underestimating just the impact of it.
I would add only that I think more fundamental problem is that we're having trouble with kids and adults as well connecting to their Judaism in a meaningful way. How much the internet is responsible is an interesting discussion, but the problem we're having on the ground as educators is we're just having a lack of enthusiasm, concepts of emunah, where people really feel their Judaism and take it seriously. And I think that's operating on two levels. One is general integration as wholesome, happy, productive people, and the second is the Jewish take on that, which is their attachment to their Judaism. And I think this is echoing in families, so it isn't only the kids who are having this issue. We're seeing it across the board, and I think that's the real problem facing us, is that there's just a lack of meaningful attachment to their Judaism.
Okay, we're going to springboard that. Yeah, Rabbi.
If I could just build on what Rabbi Tatz just said, I had an epiphany over the last few months, mostly over the summer. I brought in someone in my shul who works with children at the main children's hospital here in Toronto and studies neuroscience. She was talking about the adverse effects of screen time in general on children. That's including devices and iPads and televisions and so forth. And she said her point was, and it really sort of lit a light bulb in my head, her point was that when children are overexposed, overstimulated on sensory overload from all of these screens that they're watching all the time, there's a part of their brain that shuts down. It's the part of the brain that's in charge of imagination, of creativity. Because if everything is being fed into the brain without the opportunity to pause and to be pensive and to think about ideas independently and to create images in your own mind without this external stimuli, it creates some positive things in the brain, but turns off other things that are very dangerous and are counterproductive. Now, as it pertains to Judaism, or any religion, I guess, but we want to focus on Torah and Yiddishkeit. Look, what is our belief? Our belief that there are two realities. There's the external reality of what we call the Olam Hagashmi, of this world that we perceive with our senses. And then there's a deeper reality. There's the Olam Haruchni, a spiritual dimension, which includes God and all of the other creations that God created in this world, which are invisible, including the way that our mitzvah performance and our prayers interact with the cosmos. These are all things that if we don't have imagination, if everything that we connect with is visceral and three-dimensional and connected to our physical Gashmi world, then how can we expect our children to buy into it when that part of their mind has not been cultivated? To me, this is a very, very direct reason why screen time, this excessive screen time, is pulling our children away from religious thought in general, because religion requires disconnecting from the physical realities and connecting with something higher. And the screen time is constantly bombarding our children with the sole reality of this world. She quoted a statistic that I just wanted to share with you, and then I'll be quiet. The Canadian Pediatric Society, which is very much in line with the American Pediatric Society, understanding the serious threat that screen time poses to our children, have said that any child under 2 years old should not have any screen time at all. Nothing, no cartoons, nothing, under 2 years old. Children 2 to 5 should only be exposed to less than 1 hour a day of screen time. And children older than 5, and ostensibly this would, I would assume, include teenagers as well, should have not more than 2 hours a day. Now, our children, if you go, there are apps that can tell you how many hours a day our children are on the screen.
Yeah, it's 2 hours every 2.5 hours, if we're lucky.
It's unbelievable. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been told that children go during their lunch period, during their recess period, and they're using their screens, they're using their devices.
Look, there are more and more schools across the religious denominational spectrum that have started to outlaw smartphones in schools. And this really started in many ways in a private school movement. Take a look at Silicon Valley and take a look at some of the most expensive schools that exist there. the majority of them that I know of or that I've been exposed to or I've seen have a zero tolerance policy in which they do not allow cell phones in their schools. These are some of the executives in the companies who are making the most amount of money off of these technologies, and they don't want to send their own kids to schools that allow cell phones in school because of the impact that Rabbi Korobkin is recognizing.
There's a tool we have that we can use possibly, and that is we are a culture that reads. And the difference in reading and screen or television time is that, as the Rabbi said, when you look at a television screen, you don't need to imagine. It's all there for you. You can't read without engaging. If you watch television, you can zombie out and be perfectly happy. If you read and zombie out, nothing goes in. You got to read it again. Exactly. And Shabbos is a great opportunity for that because, for the kids who are not using their phones on Shabbos, if we can stimulate them to read things and to engage in their imagination. There are a couple of Cleveland. Cleveland has a printing, I think it's called the Moist Press. Have you seen that? Cleveland has a press that puts out books for kids and teenagers, secular literature, that has been vetted from a Torah perspective, all of it calculated to be wholesome, good, imagination driving. So there is literature you can give kids, apart from Torah material as well. So perhaps we could put a bit of emphasis on that.
Okay, so I think that many of us that grew up with a TV in their home, you had to there was a room with a TV, you had to fight your siblings for what was on the TV screen. And now just everyone has their own screen and you don't even have to be in your house. So we get the ubiquitousness of it. It's a great challenge. But I do want to take a jump off to something a little bit different here, which is a challenge that every parent has, whether you're in the 5th century or today, but obviously it's a little bit more challenged today, I think, because kids feel that they're, as we say, a man d'amar, like every 10-year-old says, and I remember telling my parents, I'm 15, I know everything. Like, what do you tell me what to do? I was a little bit chutzpahdik back then, Mom and Dad, I apologize for that. Your other children were worse. I was the better one, right? But I just like to say, so given now, as a principal, as Baruch Hashem, your parents as well, how do you gauge balancing giving your kids freedom to make mistakes, freedom to do things that are inappropriate versus following the rules? How does a school deal with that? And you're also a parent, so how do you deal with that?
Everyone's different. I would say I tend to lean a little bit more towards the authoritarian side of things, in the sense that I'm fundamentally a big believer that when you have young kids, and it's a question as to what age that ends, there's a parent, and a parent has the requirement to set rules. Look, I regularly tell our parents in the context of Shabbos that they should have a technology drawer, and all technology should go in that drawer, and it should be in the kitchen, or it should be in a public area, and all technology, including laptops and cell phones, should go in that drawer on Friday afternoon, and it doesn't come out. I tell parents regularly that there should be no technology allowed outside of the living room, the dining room, main areas of the home, including adult children. If they're in the house and they're under your roof, these are rules, these are guidelines that you set. I tell parents that they should turn off their internet at a certain hour of the evening. And, I don't know what percentage necessarily heed this advice. And we have to remember in all of this, and I think this needs to be said at the outset, we can do everything right, and in the end of the day, there's an incredible amount of mazel. There is no playbook. You don't need a license to become a parent, and you can have all the right systems and have everything thought out and all the right strategies, and at the end of the day, hakol b'dei shamayim, and there's a lot of mazel that goes into it. But I think that kids crave order. Kids in general expect a certain amount of sensibility and structure, and they look for that, and they want that. They love consistency. Maybe I'll mention it later on, but they love when expectations and reality meet up with each other, when they match each other. That's something I see all the time. So I would say, from my perspective, one should not be so concerned on giving too much freedom early on. It will come. There will be plenty of time to give the freedom as kids get older, and one should err on the other side of the coin as much as possible.
I was supposed to go 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. We'll go to Rabbi Tatz and then Rabbi Korobkin. Rabbi Tatz?
Yeah, I also personally tend to a more authoritarian view. I think it's good for children. I think that one of the rules is that one should say yes to whatever one can. Judaism and religion in general is rather restrictive. We always we have a lot of things we're not allowed to do. So, and I learned this from my wife, if I may quote her, that where you can say yes to little kids, you ought to. But then when you say no, it should be very firm as well when you draw the line. I'd also like to add that a framework of discipline is not only good for children's character, it's also good for their minds. When you think about it, their truth is always limited. Falsehood is unlimited, truth is limited. How many right answers are there to a mathematical question? 1. How many wrong answers? As many as you'd want. Which means that a creative thinker needs to be a disciplined thinker. We're not talking about a constrained thinker. Creative thinkers can think outside the box and break rules, but always in paths that are true. So when you set up children with a framework of discipline in an organized and structured environment, it's good for their behavior, as you pointed out, but it's also good for their minds. And it's a paradoxical fact, maybe, that children accept that there need to be rules. That doesn't mean they like to obey them. When your 14-year-old says, Abba, it's 9 o'clock, it's my bedtime, I think I'll go to bed, you take his temperature, the kid's got a fever, they're not normal. But they know that there need to be rules. When a child says to you, why are there rules? By the time they ask you for rationalization behind the rules, it's much too late, right? And the right answer to that is not because it's religious or because it's right. The only answer you can give, it's my house. When you get married, you can come to dinner without a shirt. In this house, no shirt, no dinner, whatever the rule is. And that they can't argue against. So these are the kinds of things you do. And I'll add one final thing, if I may. I think the parents who are dealing with kids who are acting out and difficult, in all ages, but typically in the teenage years, I think it's a parent's obligation to assert all the discipline you can get away with and wisely turn a blind eye where you're not going to win. So if you've got a child doing something on Shabbos in their room, behind closed doors, whatever it is, and insisting on that, all you do is lose authority. But I think it's a tragic error to abdicate responsibility where you can assert it. So I say to parents who are having trouble with teenagers, what you can get away with asserting, you would definitely need to do that. Just because you've lost some other battles doesn't mean you have to lose them all. Beyond what you can assert and get away with, you're forced to turn a blind eye because you're not going to win those battles anyway. So it's a wise decision you need to make about which battles are worth fighting and which ones are not worth fighting. But the ones that you can win, that's where you put your foot down and you have a voice of authority, and children look up to that.
Mm-hmm. I would only add, and I don't mean to sound cliche-ish, but King Solomon said, Chanoch lana'ar al pi darko, that every child is unique. My wife and I have been blessed with a number of children, and it's uncanny how different each child is from the other. There is no one fast and steady rule that we can apply to each and every child. There are some children who are simply born with a rebellious streak, that the more we try to confine them, the more they will rebel. There are other children who very much are parent pleasers and authority pleasers, and they want to do the right thing. And we deal with each child a different way. We're going to be reading very shortly Parshas Toldos, where Yitzchak and Rivka have two very different boys. They have a Yaakov and they have an Esav, two very, very different kinds of children. And I don't know necessarily that the Torah is trying to tell us to learn parenting lessons from Yitzchak or Rivka or both or a combination. But certainly the way that Yitzchak dealt with Esav was completely different from the way that he dealt with the more cerebral and genteel Yaakov. And it could have, that story could be an indicator that no matter how much we try to work with our children who are born with that very, very aggressive streak, we can only do our best to try and lead them in the right direction, not necessarily succeeding in getting them to learn 10 years in Kollel, but at least getting them to become the great community leaders that they are supposed to be. I think that's really just the most important message is our children are unique neshamas, and we have to assess them as they are ba'asher husham, and try to cull the wisdom from our own parents, from our peers, in treating each one as a unique individual. I notice, thank God I have some adult children, I think we all do, and I notice that some of my children raise their children very differently from the way that my wife and I raised ours. And of course, as a grandparent, you have to, keep your mouth shut. That's the rule of grandparenting. You get to enjoy them without the work, but the price you pay is you can't say a word. And I respect that. But sometimes I'm puzzled by the way that I see my adult children negotiating with their children to do the right thing. And I sometimes, in my own mind, find myself questioning whether that's the right way, because as both Rabbi Tatz and Rabbi Grauer pointed out, our children are hungry for structure. And if we don't provide it for them, they act out in ways that they normally wouldn't. So that's just something else to keep in mind.
So I'd like to add that when we talk about discipline, we also talk about the love as well. You know, the Talmudic formula for education is a very strong left hand and a very strong right hand. Simcha Wasserman, who was our teacher in this really, who incidentally happened to be childless, but when we asked him once about how he became such an authority in child raising, he said he did have experience how his parents raised him, although he never had the opportunity to do that with his own children. And his teaching was you need an extreme expression of love, an extreme expression of discipline. And extreme is really extreme. I'll tell you a brief story about him, which is not for our viewers, not for our generation, but it sets a certain tone. He said there was a rule in his parents' home, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman's home, that if a child asked for something, they did not get it. I once asked him, now, why have a rule like that? He said, we didn't have. You know, it was very poor. We didn't have. Parents needed us to know that if we have, you'll get. If we don't, you don't. But he told it to us in a discussion of discipline, so I know it had its own value. And he told us that one day his mother came through the door. Talking about Baranovich back in that generation. His little brother David was 4 years old. The only two of them had survived the war. His mother walked in through the door with a little honey. And in Eastern Europe, you know, there were no candies. That was a tremendous delicacy. At age 4, the child knew that if he asked for something, he wouldn't get it. So he drew a chair up to the table, sat down, made a loud bracha she'akol. And his mother went to the kitchen and brought him a glass of water. You know, a modern parent would melt in, you know, emotion. But, you know, and they turned out the people they turned out. We can't do that to our children, but we can do the equivalent at the level we're capable of.
Look, along the lines, though, of what you're saying in the context of parents negotiating with teenagers, a colleague of mine who's the principal of an elementary school shared with me last year that they happened to have overheard an incident in which a mother brought their little kindergarten to school to look at the classroom, to look at the school, and then they walked over in the corner and they turned the mother, this principal heard the mother turn to the little kid and said, so now remember, 2 days ago you went to this school, yesterday was this school, today you're here, which one of the three do you like the best? Okay, and it's a crazy story, but it was a true story. Basically, the mother was turning to this kindergarten and asking the child, which one did you like the best? Which toys were the nicest? Which colors were the best? Again, I don't know what ended up happening in the context of the choice that was made, but it could be a bit ridiculous.
Well, there is what to be said about empowering children and giving them the sense that perhaps they are in control of their destiny, but it has to be done, as you say, within reason.
Yes.
I want to throw a curveball question here, as we're on sort of topic two. Just if one or all of you can answer this question, how do you deal with the fact that, okay, now you have a kid that's Chinuch al pi darko, your 10-year-old, your 12-year-old, and you're giving your 10-year-old just a lot more privileges because that kid needs it. And then the immediate older kid and the immediate younger kid sees it, hey, it's not fair. You know, I have to be in bed by 11. My younger sibling has Netflix in the house and is going to bed 3 o'clock in the morning. So how do you educate one kid, Chinuch al pi darko, when the other kids feel it's not fair? This is, to me, the toughest thing to do as a parent. So I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about that, because I have no clue.
Well, there is this running joke that the oldest child is dealt with the most severely, as you said, and then as we get more gray hair, we get more fatigued easily. We're tired of running, and we as parents start to slow down and be more permissive with our children as time goes on. We have to check ourselves. You know, with age, not only becomes, you know, we become not as necessarily as physically active, but we're supposed to become wiser as well. One of the things that's so important is to learn from older people how to use the power of our speech to be persuasive to our children. Younger parents who are inexperienced might resort too readily to a little patch in the tuchus, using some corporal punishment. And an older parent can sometimes have the wisdom to know that the right words and the right inflection placed at the right time can actually accomplish more than any kind of physical patch that we might give our children. Your point.
Yeah, so let's say your 15-year-old, you let your 15-year-old go to a co-ed camp. Let's say that's not your vibe at the home, but that's what this kid needs.
Right.
Or you let your 15-year-old have no curfew. And your 13-year-old and your 17-year-old are aghast. And they're like, why can't we do that?
Well, if they're chalishing to do it, then maybe there's something to discuss with them. Usually what happens is that each child, at least that's my experience, is on a different place religiously. You know, one child may be really a masmid and is really getting into the learning, and you say, it's not got nothing to do with co-ed or not co-ed, but I want you to go to a camp where there's going to be learning a couple of hours every day, because that's what you can handle. And you make that child feel privileged that they're going to a more serious kind of camp where they're learning more. And this child, you know, that's best for that child. If the child gives you a hard time, I think that may be an indication that they're trying to test the waters to see how far you'll go. But you can always turn that decision into something which demonstrates to the child that you have such respect for them and their abilities, that's why you've chosen that path for them.
There is something you can say to children, and that is that when kids say, why don't I get the same as somebody else, you can say, we don't give all children in this home the same, we give each one what he or she needs. Hashem deals with us that way. He doesn't give us all the same, he gives us each what we need. It's easier when the older ones get the more privileges, because then it's more logical as well. But when an older one has a bedtime that's different than a younger one, and they say, why don't I have the same? You say, he or she is that age, it's appropriate for them, you get what you need. When you be that old, you'll get that too. So the ideology, I think, the hashkafa behind it is not to say you all get the same, but each one gets what they need. It's a very cogent argument to young people.
Want to close on that?
Look, I'll add two thoughts. Number one, you need to daven and say Tehillim in these situations, in the sense that, I know it sounds somewhat cliche, but these are really challenging questions and situations to be in. And you could do all of that, and it could work wonderfully, sometimes not. Sometimes it's worthwhile to seek advice from a professional, from a therapist, or from a rabbi, or from someone who maybe has dealt with these types of situations. There are certain instances in which a professional will tell you, you know what, you should be open and honest with your 13 or 11-year-old, and you should tell them that so-and-so is having certain challenges, and as a result, we're doing certain things. And there are other situations where the professionals will say, under no circumstance should you do that at all, and they'll guide in a different direction. It's really hard to give instructions in a theoretical case, but these are some of the challenges that exist in parenting, and I don't think it's an easy one.
Okay, thank God I have my wife take care of everything. I do nothing. Okay, so we're at to the last question, and then we'll call it an evening. Okay, so I think that's something we all struggle with, giving meaningful Yiddishkeit, competing with the noise and the thought pollution of the world. It's like that is what we want. We want our kids to love Hashem and love Torah mitzvos, and they're competing against a lot. So Rabbi Korobkin, Rabbi Tatz, and Rabbi Grauer to close.
I recently had a congregant come over to me and say, you know, one of the problems that I have in perhaps more of the Orthodox shuls that aren't so yeshivish is that, you know, no one's giving musar. I want someone to slap me across the face once in a while and tell me what I have to do. And I said, So he thought that maybe I was intimidated because of the politics of the board and I shouldn't give too much musar. I said, believe me, the shul will be doing me a favor. I can make aliyah tomorrow. I'd be a happy man. The issue is that today's generation, and I speak only for what I'm observing in today's generation, need a tremendous amount of love. As Rabbi Tatz talked about in a prior generation with Reb Simcha and his parents, there was one derech. It was a Litvisha derech. There was austerity in the world, not just in the Jewish world. And there was one mahalach. There was one way of raising children. In today's world, where society is so permissive and so permeated with the message of empowerment, we just have to reinforce how much we love our children. I love you, I love you, I love you, and that's why you have to do X. And making sure that our children know that they are loved, and at the same time, and that we respect their great abilities, that we hold them in very high regard, and at the same time using that as the foundation for why they need to comply with certain things in their lives so that they will become the people they're destined to become. I think that has to be the overarching message. Now, for each parent and for each circumstance, that's going to vary, but that sort of basic structure is, I think, what our children need most.
Two quick points I'd like to make. One is, before the Yiddishkeit needs to be integrated, happy, thriving kids. The kids who are pushed on a Jewish level, but they're not functional on a personal level, everything goes eventually. You can't build healthy Yiddishkeit and learning on a frustrated and fractured personality. So and when a child is struggling, that's the dimension that needs to be addressed first. When they're thriving, happy, wanting to go to school, wanting to learn, the Judaism will probably follow. So that's very important to remember. And second thing is, the Judaism needs to be taught creatively. So that when you're giving a Gemara shir, for example, to boys who, let's face it, why should they be interested? There's sports out there, there's glitzy, glamorous stuff. Why should they be interested in old, dusty, hundreds and thousands of years old, technical, legal niceties when you're 13? It's not natural. So the teacher needs to be creative, riddles and cool things that they, you bribe them if necessary. What's wrong with little bribery? Prizes. And the teacher has to have some, cool challenges. Here's the question. During the next class, you will discover the answer to that. There's a prize for doing it. You have to be creative, to engage them. So if they are drawn by the media, which are professionally engaging, we need to be professionally engaging too. And it's just not good enough to use the old, dry, religiosity. It sounds trite, and we just got to do better than that. So,
This is a good time to plug Torah Live, my friend's amazing app. Yeah. Torah Live, good stuff. Yeah.
First of all, it is an incredible cover to be with both of you, and a big thank you to be on this distinguished panel. It really is an honor. I would say three things. First of all, I agree so much, Rabbi Tatz, that social, emotional well-being, mental wellness, mental health is paramount, and that has to be looked after first and foremost. And I also agree incredibly that we need to make Judaism, Yiddishkeit, Torah, mitzvos enticing for our kids. I had a Rebbe of mine who once said, "Siag l'chachma shtik." And the idea was that you need to figure out a way to get to kids. But I'm also a huge believer that we need to make it compelling. I'm a big believer in Shabbatons, in singing, in dancing, in adding a ruchniut to the experiential aspects to learning, trying to have as many of those as possible. Kids have to enjoy it. Kids have to love it. The love is obviously essential, but don't forget, mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. And as kids are engaged in these healthy activities, and as we're able to provide healthy outlets for them that are kosher and that are exciting, they're going to get into it more, right? You have to acculturate these positive actions as much as possible. And frankly, schools need to work with shuls and need to work with parents in that regard. I'll share just one last anecdote. I had a parent in my office a few weeks ago who was complaining a little bit about the fact that her son doesn't go to Minyan, on days when there's a vacation, days when there's no school. And I know her, and we know each other, member of your shul, but that's okay. But I said, no. I said to her, listen, we both know that your husband doesn't go to Minyan. I said, it's not a secret, we know that. And she says to me, yes, Rabbi, but that's why I sent him to Or Chaim. That's the reason I sent him to yeshiva, because I wanted him to go to Minyan. And I said, listen, I wish we could do that all the time. I wish we could solve for that. It's just not that simple. So you have all of these pieces that come together, and ultimately that's what you have to do to sort of overcome a little bit, a small piece of the noise, and then you need a lot of mazel. You need a lot of mazel throughout, because ultimately that's an essential part of it.
But your message, though, is that parents should not think that the yeshiva is the panacea, is the magic bullet that's going to cure everything. We are partners with our parents. The schools and the shuls are partners, and if any one of those parties is not willing to be an active partner, it's not going to work.
Schools are not spiritual hospitals. It just doesn't work that way.
Right.
They play a key role, a key component, but halavaya would be that simple.
Right.
I want to end off with, I was a Gilgal of a game show host. So we're going to end off with just a question, sort of answer the question, because the world is great. Hashem loves us. Hashem loves the Jewish people. So I'm going to start off a sentence, and then I'm going to each of the three rabbis finish the sentence. And no, this has not been pre-planned. So they're actually very nervous right now. They're like, Rabbi, putting me on the spot. Okay.
I'm gonna go last. I'm the youngest.
Okay. So we're going to Rabbi Tatz, Rabbi Korobkin, and Rabbi Grauer. Okay. We're going to end off with this. Teenagers are amazing because Rabbi Tatz.
Because they're fresh in the world.
Because they're discovering themselves and finding out what it means to be an adult.
Because they push us all to be great people and to up our game in order to be able to figure out how to help them to succeed and how to help them to become incredible adults.
Amazing. Rabbanim, thank you so much for joining us. Amudim, please support a great organization helping really everyone, and you don't really know about it because they do it privately. So thank you so much for joining us, and everyone should have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.